More than half of retirees downsize their living situation once they retire, according to Senior Living. But there are plenty of logistics, namely taxes, that can impact the process. Joining me now, we've got Adam Brewer, who's the tax attorney at AB Tax Law. Great to have you here with us. So when downsizing, retirees, they might be headed to a different state altogether. You talk about this in some of your notes here, mentioning the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, known as Trump's tax cuts, accelerating a shift from high states to low states. Could you tell us more on that and why that might mean some changes for folks' tax bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Brad. So quite a lot to talk about there, but I guess the central point is if you're a retiree looking to downsize, don't take the tax side of things lightly. It is a complex mix because we're talking about income tax, we're talking about retirement, we're talking about property tax, and we're also looking at inheritance tax. So we got a lot going on, and then you're talking about possibly two different states or two different locations. So definitely something that if a retiree is looking to downsize, they really look at the tax side of things because it's not always going to be clear cut. Where I'm at in California, Prop 13 means property tax for people who have been in their home a long time is generally pretty low. I know that's not the case in every state. So definitely something that retirees looking to downsize should take seriously.
And so with that in mind, what are the benefits to renting versus buying your new downsized residence in retirement from a tax standpoint?
Yeah, so that's something I touched on in my notes. And essentially what we're looking at is there is a shift, of course, I don't want to say Rust Belt, but the Rust Belt states where I'm from originally, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, to the Sun Belt, that shift was always taking place, but the Tax Cut and Jobs Act really accelerated it. So what we saw there is limiting state and local tax to $10,000 as an itemized deduction. So suddenly, what's my incentive to pay a bunch of tax in New York when I can just go to Florida and be tax-free? They limited the mortgage interest deduction, so you can only deduct interest on the first $750,000 of your mortgage. So again, if you're in a high cost of living state, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, your home very well could be over $1 million. You're not even able to deduct all that mortgage interest. And then finally, with regards to moving to the low cost state, there's a higher standard deduction now. And so really a lot of taxpayers, even if you have a mortgage, if you pay property tax, you might not even be using that standard itemized deduction rather.
Now, maybe you're thinking of selling your home back to your kids. What are some of the tax implications to be mindful of in that process?
Yeah, so that can be a good way if you sell it to your kids. You have to be careful about, what is the fair market value of the home if you sell it. If you gift it, again, the lifetime gift exemption is so high. I think it's $14 million for 2025. Most taxpayers aren't going to run into that. But what their heirs may run into is if they ever decide to sell the property, now they could possibly get hit with a massive capital gains because they're going to essentially be giving up what we call a step up in basis. And so what that is when you pass away, your heirs are treated as if they paid what the fair market value is on the date of death. And so if you gift it, instead your heirs are walking into your basis. So if you purchased your home in 1970 for $50,000 or whatever homes cost then, and now it's worth $1 million, you could be handing your kids a big tax bill that they otherwise might not have.
Interesting. And when going through the downsizing process, how do SALT deductions play a role in the decision making?
Oh, that's a curveball because right now it's $10,000. So again, it's not a huge incentive for taxpayers to be paying their state and local tax, to be paying property tax on top of that. But now we're looking at extending the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and the SALT is a major point of contention. So I know there's talk of increasing that to $20,000, but then there's some blue state Republicans who say, hey, that's a non-starter for me. So again, in this climate politically, we really don't know where that's going. It could stay 10,000. I suspect it'll be increased, but whether that's enough of an incentive, for taxpayers who are retirees, who are getting hammered on property tax, that's tough for me to say.
Just lastly, while we have you here, it is tax season. Sticking with taxes, the Trump administration has announced a federal hiring freeze and offered incentives to federal workers to quit their job. To the extent and your estimation that you're kind of looking through this, what does this all mean for the IRS more broadly and Americans filing for their taxes this season?
Yeah, absolutely. So it just reiterates a point that we've been talking about for a while, and that is if you can electronically file your return, whether that's through the IRS free service you just discussed, or whether another service, if at all possible, electronically file that return. This isn't a situation where you want to be waiting on the IRS to open your envelope, process a paper return. It's just going to take a lot longer than you hoped for, especially if we see IRS employees retiring, if we see other processing slowdowns. Get that in electronically, get your refund faster. Yeah, and then the other taxpayers that are going to suffer from this, sometimes things just don't go right when you're processing a return. So anybody who has to have like a second point of contact with IRS, calling them, everyone knows how difficult it can be to get on the phone. That could possibly be a lot more challenging.
Adam, thanks so much for taking the time here with us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Certainly.